The number of the day today is 10,000, because that is the number of times that federal judges have ruled against detentions carried out by ICE under the second Trump administration. That's what this new analysis by Politico found, and these cases include things like a nursing mom who was detained despite active refugee status, but it also includes a case of another mom separated from her 1-year-old child and released only after her son ended up in the hospital, and they include situations like parents of American service members, victims of human trafficking, and a 5-year-old boy who was taken into custody on his way home from school. And overall, these more than 10,000 rulings against Trump, they reportedly amount to around 90% of the rulings involving ICE detention since the administration upended longstanding practice with a policy shift last July. Because you see, federal law technically requires the detention of people who are seeking admission to the country. The previous administrations interpreted that as applying for the most part to people apprehended at the border. But last year, acting ICE Director Todd Lyons said in an agency-wide memo that anyone who had entered the country illegally would be seen as seeking admission. And that meant that millions of immigrants, including some who have lived in the United States for years, became subject to mandatory detention without the opportunity for bond. And that's apparently been the driving force behind a flood of lawsuits that's been overwhelming both federal judges and lawyers in the administration, especially as ICE has either defied or tried to get around a lot of rulings against the agency, including by moving detainees to a new state, which just leads to even more lawsuits. With a volume of cases, the consistency of rulings against the White House, it really stands out. It's why you have Politico describing the trend as a staggering rejection of a core piece of Trump's immigration agenda and adding, Trump's unprecedented detention policy, which is almost certainly headed to the Supreme Court, infuriated lower courts in ways no other modern issue has. And many of these judges, they have not held back in their opinions. One bluntly describing the administration's approach as beyond the reach of ordinary legal description and as an assault on the constitutional order. Meanwhile, others have voiced concern about the specific tactics employed by ICE in their pursuit of mass detention and deportation. Tactics including arresting people dropping off their kids at school, detaining people in courthouses after immigration hearings and in ICE offices after routine check-ins, and executing after-the-fact warrants to try and justify arrests that may have otherwise been unlawful. You had one judge noting that despite hundreds of similar rulings in this and other courts resoundingly in favor of the ICE detainee petitioners, ICE continues to act contrary to the law, to spend taxpayer money needlessly, and to waste the scarce resources of the judiciary. And some judges, including one that ruled against the administration 90 times, they've actually compared their work to the Greek myths of Heracles having to slay the Hydra or Sisyphus having to push a boulder uphill for eternity. Though also, just to be clear, it is not a few judges that are handling a bulk of these cases. Because while it's true, some have heard more cases than others, more than 425 judges in total have ruled against the administration at least once. And a huge key thing is that includes even a majority of judges appointed by Donald Trump himself. Right? One of those Trump appointees actually wrote in his ruling, "This isn't how things are supposed to work in America. Unquestionably, the laws of human decency condemn such villainy." But despite all that, including losses from Trump judges, you had Trump officials blaming the administration's losses on the left and their activist proxies on the judiciary. And with that, also predicting that the administration will win at the Supreme Court level. Though notably, there in dozens of cases, the department's actually admitted that it had no defense for the administration's actions. Even still, and this just speaks to how fucked things are right now, it is true that the Supreme Court could eventually end up on the side of the White House. In fact, 2 federal appeals courts, the 5th Circuit and 8th Circuit, have already ruled in favor of the administration's position. But notably, 3 others, the 2nd Circuit, the 11th Circuit, and the 6th Circuit, have ruled against the administration. So we're kind of just stuck having to wait to see where these cases go. But also, in the meantime, this is just one way that the agency's actions have been or may be on the wrong side of the law. Because there are also concerns about the legality of ICE's tactics and use of force against protesters and immigrants, including during operations and in detention facilities. Now, on the subject of detention, the agency has faced numerous allegations about overcrowding, unsanitary, and generally inadequate conditions at its facilities, which may also be connected to the fact that ICE recently reported its 18th detainee death in 4 months, putting the agency on track for a new record. And while that's going on, the agency's been throwing up roadblocks in front of members of Congress hoping to inspect facilities. Just this last Friday, you had an appeals court actually denying the administration's request to revive its policy requiring members of Congress to give 7 days notice before visiting ICE detention centers, which had been struck down in February. But now it's implementing new rules demanding that lawmakers identify specific detainees that they want to speak with by name at least 2 business days in advance and produce a signed consent form from each individual. So you actually had California Representative Mike Levin saying that he and his colleague Sarah Jacobs learned about this new policy when they made a surprise visit to a facility in San Diego and they weren't allowed to speak with detainees. Them also posting a photo of an ICE memo signed by Lyons and dated the same day as the visit, which claimed that the number of ICE visits from Congress had skyrocketed under Trump, and adding, "These visits are disruptive and resource intensive because they pull staff away from law enforcement duties and security posts." Then Levin responding, "The volume Lyons is citing is a direct consequence of his own department dismantling all the alternatives. They gutted the internal oversight and then complained that the external oversight is too active, then issued a memo to restrict it. All of that only makes sense if the goal is no oversight." And ultimately, we had to talk about this today because while ICE seems to be in the spotlight a lot less because of all the other shit, it may also be part of the reason the other shit is happening. And it definitely doesn't mean that the horrible stuff that so many judges have taken issue with have stopped happening.